everyone. Welcome to the Rita McGrath podcast. I am here with Peter Georgescu, who I'm proud to count as a friend, but he's also a very wise advisor. He has an amazing story. He is the chairman emeritus of Young Rubicam. He took that company public, one of the most successful public relations advertising companies. He is the author of many books, among which is one of my favorites called Capitalists Arise, End Economic Equality, Grow the Middle Class, Heal the Nation. And he and I share a passion for the good that capitalism can do and how to address some of its darker sides. So Peter, welcome. I'm so pleased to see you again.
Rita, so good to see you again. It's a pleasure. A delight.
Absolutely. So I thought for those of my listeners that don't know you and don't know your story, if you wouldn't mind telling it one more time, just so that people get a sense for the context in which you came.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to be brief because, like anybody who was born in the war era, the Second World War, there are amazing stories there to be told. If you made it through, you have a story to tell. So it's I was born literally as the war was about to begin, and my parents shipped me to my grandparents in Transylvania, where I spent the war. My dad very quickly, I would say, he got enrolled with the OSS. My mother was a courier between the OSS out of Istanbul and my dad in prison. They concocted all kinds of nasty stories for the acts, actually, for against the Germans, which actually played a big role as the Russian army came through Romania. There was no resistance, and they blew bridges to hamper the Nazi withdrawal towards Berlin. Anyway, lots of stuff like that. My dad was, and the reason he was put in prison by the Germans is because he was the general manager of the largest oil field, probably one of the largest oil fields in the world at the time, Ploiești oil fields. Biggest battle of the Second World War was to try to take it out by the Allied forces. So after the war, we got together, and I spent the only 1 year I ever spent with my parents, which was from the age of late 60, maybe I was 7 years old. And then in 47, so the year 1946, I spent with my parents. In 47, they came to New York for a brief trip. It was a world managers trip by SO International, part of Standard Oil. And they met in New York. At the time the Iron Curtain comes down, the Russian army is now throughout Romania. They take over the government. They install the communist regime in Romania. And about a year later, my parents are now in New York. They were going to, my father said, I got to leave New York. I've got to go take care of my kids. Now, my father's control out of Istanbul was a fellow called Frank Wisner. He was one of the 4 people who started the CIA later on. And he told my dad, look, we know that you are at the top of the list to be arrested and killed in Romania along with your wife. No point for you to go back. You'll be killed. So they convinced him, against his will and desire, to stay in America, thank God, because we all have been dead. In Romania, they arrested my grandfather. He was almost 80 years old. They took him to prison north of Romania in what is now a museum. We went to visit it. That's where they killed him. And then they arrested my brother and I and our grandmother. They took us close to the Russian border, where I was about 10 or so. I don't remember exactly the details of that, but I was about 10. And I was put to work. So I went to work, not in a camp. I worked alongside normal workers. They were instructed not to talk to me personally, except to give me directions of this and that. And we lived in one room. They took this room out of somebody's house, a bunch of hay, fresh hay, because we can smell it when we walked in. was our bed, a bunch of blankets, and that was life. Outhouse in the back, a water. There was a pipe water out of a well. That was the fresh water. That was life. Got up to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. Came back at 6 at night. Not a book in sight. 6 days a week, about just short of 10 hours a day. Sundays you slept, so 6 days a week. And that was life for close to 5 years. And so I cleaned sewers for a bit because I was small enough to be comfortable underneath there. And then I dug hole for electric poles. I worked on high tension wires and whatnot. The reason that they kept us alive, which I only obviously understood later on, because by the way, nobody knew where we were. There was no communication between us and our parents or anybody else. Or my grandfather, whom by that time was close to being killed. Anyway, so there we were, and that was just life. That was going to be life, period. There was no sense of the communists ever letting us go. I went through brainwashing sessions about every 3 months where they told us what a horror my parents were, traitors, miserable people, and we were just children with the bad seeds that we inherited from the awful parents that we had. So that lasted on, and my brother was listening and hearing and I think hurting. And I was terrified inside and acted like a little bulldog. I would scream at them. No, you're wrong, you do this. Absolutely, because I was so much younger, my brother was 5 years older, I was a little aggressive, not understanding these people control your life, big guy. So, but I didn't really sense that or understood that at the time. But that was life. The reason they kept us alive is because they wanted us as bait. Maybe because my father was now advancing in his position at Stanford, New Jersey, in the oil business. And yes, indeed, in 1950s, so they left in early 47. So the end of 46, early 47. And now it's 1953. They're still in New York. And they come to my office. There was a Romanian consulate, and he came to see my father, said, basically, you want to see your kids alive again? You're going to spy for us. My father that night went to the FBI. Oh, they said my parents had become American citizens by then. I said, how can I do that? That's my new country. I can't do that. I said, that's not a problem for us. My dad said, well, it's a problem for me. So he left the guy and went home, and he and my mother obviously had a hell of a night. And that morning he went to the FBI, told them the story, and they said, become a double agent. My dad said, well, I can't do that. I've seen that play before. It never ends well. Sooner or later, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that. They'll kill the kids anyway. What else? After a while, they said, go to the story publicly. The Russians at that time, at the height of the Cold Wars, would not want to have the Romanians kill them. So you'll be protected for a little while. So we're buying ourselves some time to figure out what to do. There was nothing else to do, so that's what they did. They went public. And they said, by the way, Mr. Georgescu, if the story doesn't catch fire, we can flame it a little bit. We've got some contacts with publishers here and there, and we can get the story out. Well, it wasn't necessary, because at that time, at the height of the Cold War, the people really interested in this, and the story of American citizens being blackmailed by the Russians did not sit well.
It's a great story.
And so the press everywhere, every little town in America, just about, the local papers, never mind, Look, Life magazine, etc., they all carried it, New York Times, television. But every little paper in the country published the story. And so one of the people who read this story was a congresswoman from Ohio. She was an amazing woman. And I must say that it was, she was a remarkable person in the sense that she replaced her husband who was a congressman. He died. And so she became his replacement. And she was a powerhouse in Congress. It was a remarkable woman. And so, over time, she became the senior person representative on the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress. And she called my father up and said, "Oh, Mr. Georgescu, I'll get you boys out of Romania. Don't you worry about a thing." And so in the end, she went and spent a year going from Russian diplomats to Romanian diplomats and so forth and so on. And eventually she ended up in Eisenhower's office, and she had helped Ike become president of the United States. And so she probably said to him, "Mr. President," or Ike, however they talk to each other, "get the boys out." And in the end, as I learned 40 years later, I think we got traded for a bunch of Russian spies we held in the United States. And so I arrived in New York on April 13th, 1954. And I was 15 years old. I was not quite a boy. I was a young man by that time after what I went through. And the principal of Exeter said to my father, "I'll keep a place for the young boy." So, 15 years old, I had a fourth grade education. I think that was about what happened at the end of your ninth year. And I spoke not a word of English. And that was in April. So he told this to the principal, and the principal said, "I read the story, Mr. Georgescu. Your boy learned other things. You just help him learn English." So in August, we went to see the principal. We had dinner together. I don't remember the chit chat, but apparently he liked me. He said, "Look, young man, if you can pass your courses on your own by the end of the first year with no consideration for your background, you get to stay. Otherwise, I'll find the right school for you. Is that okay?" I had no idea what he was talking about. None.
So this is Exeter Academy.
This is Exeter Academy, and a pretty good school.
Yeah, excellent school.
And I said, "Yes, of course. Yes, sir." On the way out the door, she tapped me on the shoulder and said, and here's where I made a mistake. He asked me, he said, "What grade would you like to be in?" Of course, I had no clue what a grade was. And so I thought it was something to do with age. So I said, "Well, I want to be with boys my own age." That sounded logical to me. It was a mistake because he looked at me and said, "Let's see, 15 years old, no problem. You'll be a lower middler," which means a sophomore in Exeter talk. So I went to Exeter for 3 years because I said that instead of 4. I should have said, "How about 6 years at Exeter?" But anyway, the rest is pretty much, I went from there to Princeton and Stanford Business School, and I went to work, and I got to live the American dream. I really did. And what I define as the American dream is looking in the mirror and being able to say, "I am the best Peter Georgescu that I can be." And only in America could that have happened. And only because the American people wrote letters to my parents and to the government saying, "You got to do something, get the boys out of Romania," all that I'm alive. So I owe a lot for being able to live in the only country in the world that I could have survived in that fashion and become the best I can be. And I can look in the mirror today and I say the same thing. So how fortunate I am.
Mm. So with that as context, you've since gotten very interested in basically what happened since that sort of halcyon days of that golden age, if you will, following the Second World War, when there was a big commitment to a thriving middle class. We had the suburbs, we had the automobile, we had, standards of living that were very high, and something happened, something changed. And you've been a keen observer of this. You were a participant in some of the decisions around it. And in fact, this book sort of traces the arc, the book Capitalists Arise, traces the arc of what you think happened since then. So tell us that story. And I think I should presage it by saying both of us share a passion for the good that capitalism can do. So this is not saying some other system is a superior system, but it doesn't have a moral arc, right? I mean, capitalism is a system of economic organization. It needs to be guided, I guess I would say.
Yes. What I think people mistake capitalism for some strange version of, it just occurred to me one time, I liken capitalism to a hurricane, believe it or not, because a hurricane, to be able to exist, requires something fundamental things in the environment. It requires warm waters around and plentiful waters. It requires certain level of pressure. It requires a certain level of wind conditions that are developed, and so forth. And then this magical storm begins, and it builds and builds and builds, fed by warm waters. And we know it, unfortunately, only too well in our country, and particularly in the coastal cities, like states like Florida and Texas and so forth. And, it's powerful force. The same thing actually happens with the economic notion that becomes capitalism. You have to have access to financial capital, to human capital, to all the rare resources that may be necessary for your business. Like if you're in the battery business, the car business, you needed to have access to lithium and all kinds of other rare resources, and so rare ingredients. And so if you have access to all of that, and if you believe in prudent risk, and if you believe in the ability to use incentive and rewards for people, while if you're a company, that gives you the force, the energy to propel forward. And that's what capitalism is all about. And so capitalism has been proven to be the most successful economic form that has ever been tried. But it also comes in different flavors. Not the force itself, but who is the beneficiary? Because that force it can't have any ethics or morality. It's just a force. So the issue then becomes, who is the beneficiary of this force? And what are the rules of the road? And what happened during that halcyon period, as you described it so well, is that business was committed to fulfill four critical stakeholders, starting with the customer first. Take care of the customer, then good things happen. And the shareholders puts in money, and the workers who work there in the communities. And that's what built America to be the most powerful force in the world. The economy thrived. After the war, the Civil War bill that put lots of young men returning from the war into higher education and colleges and whatnot, all of that innovation and energy and force produced this amazing results. Biggest dominant country in the world. And then in 1982, business together with the Reagan administration decided, gosh, we're paying a lot of money to these people. Why are we doing that? We don't have to do that. So they changed the nature, the beneficiary of capitalism. So instead of those four critical stakeholders who are all optimized and taken care of, they said, no, let's make the shareholder be the only single stakeholder that matters. So the mantra became, your job, Mr. CEO, is to maximize the
Sure.
short-term benefit of an interest of the shareholder. Maximize the short-term value for shareholders. And that became a version of capitalism, if you will, which served, unfortunately, morphed into a cancer that really created the enormous problem for this nation. It created a level of inequality from the most democratic, from the most, if you will, egalitarian nation in the history of the world. We became the most unequal financially, economically, nation in the developed world, with our, if you will, the ability to propel yourselves in a societal sense, the mobility, social mobility of our nation becomes one of the worst in the developed world, from the best to the worst. And that's why I wrote that book that you pointed out, defining the problems that in essence we had two Americas. The first is about 30 or 35% of America were doing very well and continue to do brutally well. And the other America really worse and worse. And the American dream was gone away from those people. The ability for people to believe that their children will be able to live better than they did. That was gone. That was gone. The education level, because, public schools are paid by real estate taxes. The people were paid less and less and less under the maximizing short-term shareholder value proposition. And so how you finance the schools, the quality of the schools, the quality of the teachers, the quality of the program. There's no arts being taught in most of these schools. In fact, most of these schools, there is no 3-year-olds that have some cognitive development in that area, whereas in the top 30%, almost all those kids go to some form of cognitive pre-K schools, even kindergartens. Relatively few states have kindergartens open for the affordable population. They are too high. The school costs are too high, and in many cases there are no kindergarten or early education at all. So we have poor education, and what's worse is that from 1982 through today, with a possible exception of a year or so ago, workers were paid at or below inflation. So in essence, there have been no raises given to workers for over 40 years. And that's a tragedy. And that's the economic depravity that we find ourselves in the other America. And as I talk about in my book, today, or up to today, about 60 or so percent of America most months cannot put food on the table or pay rent. So these people are really struggling. So when inflation comes along at any point in time, as it did last year or in 2008 and so forth, those people are really suffering. In fact, it has been calculated by a RAND organization, the New York Times, Time magazine published it. From 1982 through almost today, some $50 trillion have moved from the bottom 90% to the top 10% of America. That's the kind of colossal amount of value that has been denied the people who really worked very hard but were paid at, as I said, at or below inflation for all those 40 years. Justified by what reasons? Because they could. They did it because they could. So they were exploited by any other name. So business did that. Of course, there are exceptions. There are businesses who did not do that. And fortunately, in 19, well, In 2015, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and I published my book, Capitalist Horizon, in 2017, after about 10 years of understanding the level of inequality, because it was not understood.
No,
And
well,
this is one of the tragedies of, and both parties, whether it's the Republican or Democrats during those 40 years, they never owned up to the American people who said, you've got a problem. You obviously are hurting, and we got to do something about it. And even, even during the last administration, between the Trump eras, where some serious efforts were made to improve the wages of people and create more jobs, better jobs, even at that time, that administration, Biden administration, never told the American people, we feel your pain. We understand who you are. We feel your pain, and we're trying to do this and that. And so these people were kind of desperate. Nobody cared for them. Oh, they were told a couple of times, vote for me and good things will happen. Of course, good things never happened. They were still being paid the same things as they were before, because that's what business did. And so there's a lot that has transpired over time and the victim became, oh, capitalism doesn't work. Capitalism works.
it sure did.
If the beneficiaries are judged or evaluated in such a way that it is, in fact, much truer to what democracy is intended to be. And the issue is not that the solution is never one of saying the outputs and the beneficiaries must have equal wealth. Not that, but they should have equal opportunity. And that becomes really through the stronger family life, which does come with money and caring and keeping families together, not with high divorce rates, which exist today in the lower America, and also with education, which these people do not have. So equal opportunity was denied, and business was mostly responsible for this. And so I said to my colleagues in the business world, I was saying, arise, folks, pay attention. This was 2015, because social instability comes about when these conditions exist. It happened when the Bolsheviks came in Russia. It happened under Hitler in Germany. The Castro brothers came into power in Cuba. Venezuela, the same thing. Argentina several times. Chile. So we've seen this pattern before, and it never ends well.
No. Well, so one of the things that is, to me, kind of a supreme irony of the system that we seem to have created, and we both are huge admirers of Zeynep Ton's work. So Zeynep has written two wonderful books.
Right.
It's called The Case for Good Job Strategy, and the second is called The Case for Good Jobs. And she provides just very powerful evidence that if you treat your people as units of innovation, growth, and possibly revenue generation, rather than just as costs to be cut, your business actually does better. You thrive when your community thrives. The long term is what you do, and we have so many examples of companies that operate that way, and that have been incredibly successful. Everybody talks about Costco, but there's also companies like Morningstar, which is a self-managed company, the game-making company Valve, and so there are shining examples of companies that have managed to thrive, even in a tide that sort of treats people as poorly performing robots, as I like to say. And I think there are examples that show us that things can be different.
Absolutely. And you put your finger on it. And this is actually the tragedy of the situation. Still, many executives, many leaders think of the workers and their employees as necessary evils. In fact, very simply and directly, they're a cost center. That's what they are. And it usually in most companies, it's the largest cost center for the companies. Not all, but most of them. And so that's what they think of them. And the reality is quite the opposite, that the workers are and should be, in fact, a leverageable asset, not a cost center. Why? And this is the critical thing to understand, and you were alluding to this. You see, the secret to success for any business is pretty much innovation, which leads to increased productivity. And that's the C-suite doesn't produce that, neither innovation nor dramatically increased productivity. That's not what the C-suite does. But the workers and the employees, that's their main job. So what they found out in the examples that you cited, and Mr. Ford also did way back when he began to manufacture and sell cars, he paid his workers a lot of money to afford to buy his cars. So he knew something. He understood simple economics. And so what is critical is, if you treat your people well, what you want them to do is to go home and, like all the other executives, occasionally wake up in the middle of the night and say, how am I going to do something important to drive my business forward tomorrow? Now, if you are treated like that, you don't give a raise for 40 years, you're treated with disrespect, and then you're supposed to wake up in the middle of the night and say, I'm going to help my business grow tomorrow? Not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of businesses began experimenting. They felt into instinctively, what if we do things differently? And you cited a number of companies, and I'll say in today's world, most of the big successful companies practice multi-stakeholder capitalism. That is, they care for the customers, which under shareholder primacy, they did not respect the customer either.
Mm-hmm.
Invested relatively little. In fact, research and development and basic research have been for a couple of decades at the lowest levels in more decades before that, because you maximize the short-term value to the shareholders, which, by the way, was never maximized, because your business cannot grow. Your profitability is not as high. When you increase productivity, you create incremental value, dramatic incremental value, again and again and again. And so what the idea of the successful company was, you take that incremental value and you share it. And it's called profit sharing. And this is what the great companies do. Jim Senegal at Costco went into business doing that. He hired Walmart employees and doubled and sometimes tripled their salaries, and say, I want you to love my customers, make them want to come back because you treat them so well, and make my suppliers happy because I want them to provide us with the best products. And look what happened since 1983, which was the beginning of Costco. Ken Langone at Home Depot has done the same thing. He worries about the people on the floor. Those are the most important people in the company for him, because they take the customer by the hand, they take them to the shelf and say, this is the product you want. This is how you use the product. Guess what? The next time they need anything to do with what Home Depot has, from paints to hammers to mowers to whatever, that's where they keep going back. And the workers are being bonused twice a year by store. Every store has a plan. You exceed that store bogey, you get to share, and you get a bonus twice a year. And on the big guys, that's what Microsoft does. They pay their people extraordinarily well, all of their people. And Google and the best bank in the world, Jamie Dimon at JPMorgan Chase, that's the way he talks about his people. They care about his people. They understand the power. Dan Schulman, who ran who ran PayPal for years. And he found out, as a matter of fact, I remember him telling the story. He was told, and he worked with a not-for-profit called Just Capital. And they told him, gee, how well are your people doing? My people are great. They're getting paid well. Everything's great. And they said to him, how do you know that? Well, I talked to the people. I know that. They're very happy people. Really? How about doing a survey? Well, eventually he did a survey, found that close to 50% of your basic workers use food stamps to supplement their financial situation. And he went crazy. He changed all that. He gave people some restricted stock, took $4 billion to the bottom line. The stock market really went down for a very short period of time. Then they understood as the earnings started to climb. And he tripled the value of PayPal by the time he retired last year. And so
great
it's a
story.
great example. It's a great example of the workers make the difference. Why is Delta Airlines, by and large, if you travel a lot, you'll probably know that if you have a choice, you'd rather fly Delta. Why? It's the only airline that has a profit sharing for both pilots and for serving attendants. And so it works. It works. That's a different version of capitalism. And if you want to look at China, Deng Xiaoping looked at Mao and said, great revolution, great for the people, blah, 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 whatever. But it doesn't work economically. When socialism and communism is another version of socialism, because socialism means, it's the only thing you have to define socialism for what it is. You have to control, the government controls the means of distribution and manufacturing and production. That's socialism. It's proven to be a disaster. It's a disaster in the Soviet Union, it was a disaster pre Margaret Thatcher in England, and all over in Cuba, in Venezuela. It doesn't work. And it didn't work in China. And that's when Deng Xiaoping said, it's okay to be rich. And all of a sudden, the private sector blossoms. You have Jack Ma become a billionaire plus. And that's how China really triumphed, through capitalism. That's what put China on the map. Now, Xi Jinping comes along and says, no, being rich is not good. We don't like billionaires and so forth. It's all about party ideology, and party ideology trumps everything. And see what all of a sudden now, Mr. Xi Jinping is in trouble. His economy is tanking. He's also got another problem with demographics, but never mind. He put all the money in the wrong places.
Well,
he didn't take care of these people, and he didn't allow the beneficiaries to share in the wealth creation. And that's why China is fundamentally in trouble. So he either changes that somehow, which he may or may not be able to do, or they're going to continue their decline. So capitalism is at the heart of everything. And that comes from taking care of the people. And in America, if we want to continue to be a democracy, which was Hamilton's and Madison's vision, that all people are created equal, and they have to have equal opportunity in the pursuit of happiness. And Mr. Lincoln said, that's the country we want to be in. That's the country we'd like to have. And close to 1 million Americans died to protect that vision. And there have been many other leaders from Republicans and Democrats throughout history who really did a lot to protect the rights of the Black community, and as well as women, and empowering people to do their best, to have the chance to that opportunity, the pursuit of being the best that they can be. And that's why I count my blessing as a immigrant of 15-year-old coming to America, getting the benefit of a great education, and getting the opportunity to work hard and do the best I can be. And now I do what I do because it's payback time. Rita, it's payback time. I live so well, and only in this country, during all those years, only America could somebody like me and so many others. And look at so many immigrants run companies in today's world. Satya Nadella there, the Google brothers, as I said. Uh, Ajay Banga, who ran Microsoft,
MasterCard.
MasterCard, and now is president of the World Bank. I mean, these are immigrant guys who and gals who got the opportunity to live the great life. And so, we have to look at America's business in today's world and saying, people look to government and say, government's got to fix everything. With what? The government's budget a year was around 5 trillion, about $5 trillion. Business annually is between 25 and $30 trillion. We have the ability to do that. And the good news is that the shareholders do better because of that little thing, increased productivity.
Mhm.
You pay the workers fairly, things are going to work out for everybody. And the greatest beneficiary is the shareholder. They
So,
get more money than trying to maximize their value, because when you maximize the value, you don't maximize the profitability of the company. That's the reality. And it has been proven again and again and again. And
so
I,
let's talk a little bit about. I mean, so there's a number of really powerful people involved in Just Capital. There are any number of people, even kind of uber capitalist Warren Buffett. He says it's ridiculous that my secretary pays more in taxes than I do. What are some of the policies or the reforms that you think could get us back on the right track? And is it voluntary? Is it up to businesses? Do we need to have more in the way of regulation? What are some things you think could work?
look, I think the answer is a combination of both things. The most important thing is for business to understand. I mean, why would you not want to maximize your ability to make profits both short term and clearly to maximize the opportunity for long-term value creation, right? Those are the two things that multiple shareholders can do. And by the way, the corporation itself, the company itself, is a critical stakeholder. You have to invest in your products to satisfy your customers better. And those who are the smartest and constantly innovate the products that they give their customers are going to be the winners over time. No question about it. So you can't cheat your customers. You help your customers thrive. You understand who they are. You care for them. You passionately should care for your customers, just like you passionately care for your people. And the more you create a culture and a purpose for your people, you motivate them to be part of the company and share in the benefits of that, everybody wins. And the communities win. And also the corporation wins, because if you increase productivity, you have more money to invest in both the short term in terms of improving products, because productivity means more money, more cash. You can invest more money, you can make acquisitions or build new businesses or line extensions or whatever. So everybody wins. And now we have to worry about another critical stakeholder, the bigger home for all of us. It's called the planet. The cost of not fixing the challenges of climate change is a disaster, because they're huge. Just look at what's happening in the winter time with this unusual cold fronts in all kinds of parts of America, or with the fires in California that are getting where they're being propelled, the fires are being propelled by 100-mile-an-hour winds. And what's going to happen this coming summer, I'm sure, as it happened every summer, in the last bunch of years. The hurricanes are getting more powerful, more destructive. There are huge costs with this around the world, and we got to take care of our biggest homes. This is the only home we got. We can't just move around somewhere in the neighborhood. We haven't found a friendly neighborhood yet. And so we got what we got, and we better take care of our home. So the planet is an important stakeholder as well. So we got to take carbon out of the equation over time. And we better do it at increasing rates for all the reasons that most people know and understand. So those are the things that we have to do. So businesses need to do this. It's up to business and the business community. We have to allow capitalism to run its course and free market and to whatever degree possible, free and just trade with our partners, wherever it is in the world. I'm all for fair trade, but we need to have trade for us to succeed, for our businesses to thrive, and for our economies to grow. And so the government can play a role, but it's up to business. Let's be crystal clear about this. Business has got to thrive, and can only thrive if multi-stakeholder capitalism becomes the fundamental practice of capitalism in America. And we better try to get that's happening today. As I mentioned to you, some big companies and small companies are doing that. We just need to get to a tipping point. Rita, a tipping point is really essential. And that's where organizations like Just Capitals and others and friends of yours, all the people who are writing saying, we got to move there. And then we've got to really, in terms of government action, government has to invest some huge amounts of money in education, public education. We really can't afford to do that. It's not just a state issue. And if I'm a red state, I do this, and a blue state, that's ridiculous. We need all America children to be highly educated, to be able to be more productive in tomorrow's world. Tomorrow's world is going to be different, more technologically oriented. And so the better the education at the end of the day, the more the opportunity for living that American dream will exist for everybody. So government can do that. Also, government can, I believe in some form of government having a industrial policy in collaboration in business. Why? There are some areas that only government can break through the grounds. For example, if you look at healthcare, when we looked at the genome, we know that if we understood the genome, all kinds of good things were going to happen for the benefit of the pharma companies, but most importantly for the benefit of the American people. And they did. But nobody could have afforded, whenever it was 25, 30 years ago, when the genome was invented, when the research happened, nobody could have invested then about $40 billion to decode the genome. So government did that. And appropriately, when they did that, they stepped away and allowed the private sector to take over. And the pharma companies and the hospitals and everybody else invested more and more over time, where we have some of the best healthcare in the world. Unfortunately, is unequal again. In healthcare, in most on the upper America is phenomenal around the world, and down below in the other America, the larger America, the working America, is not. And they have much tougher death rate, mortality rates for children, and the life expectancy between the two Americas differs by some 10 years. And so we need to change that. So we need to find ways to get better health care to all Americans. Because if we believe in some kind of fairness and democracy and justness, everybody should be treated well, and the healthcare should be available to all of them. And I have worked at a wonderful hospital in New York City, for example, and it's a good example, and there are many other hospitals both in New York, like Langone hospitals. Our hospital is New York-Presbyterian hospitals. We have 50,000 people working there, and everybody is treated equally. Whether you're a billionaire or if you have almost no money, we spend several $100 million treating indigents who have no ability to pay. They get treated equally.
Hmm.
They get access to everybody. I remember a brief story. My barber about 10 years ago said, "Well, today I'm have to give you a 6-week haircut, not a 4-week haircut, a 6-week haircut." I said, "Oh, okay. Why are you doing that? On vacation? You going back to Italy?" "No, I gotta go see my doctor. I got some heart problem." "What's the matter with her?" I don't know. They gotta go inside. They gotta open my chest. You gotta do this. You gotta do that. Oh, so I said, I was vice chair of New York Presbyterian at the time. I said, I can help this guy. And I said, "Which hospital are you going to?" "Well, I don't know the name of it. Uptown somewhere." I said, "Roosevelt, this, that." "No, no, New York Presbyterian." I said, "Oh, better yet. And who's your doctor?" "Craig Smith." "Oh, well, Craig Smith is the best surgeon, heart surgeon was at the time, still a surgery today, head of surgery at Columbia campus of New York Presbyterian. He's the guy who gets on to the Shao of this or the king of that." And my barber got Craig Smith because they thought that this patient needed Craig Smith.
That's
And
great.
it's a wonderful story. I love it.
So you said recently that you're an optimist. I guess given your background, that would be justified.
Yes.
I'd love though to hear sources of optimism. And I talk a lot about green shoots. Even though you can point to plenty of examples of corporations behaving well, many behave badly overall, but many are just not in the movement to do things better, right? But you see these shining examples. Like one of them is CHI overhead doors, and the whole story of how KKR is really rethinking the private equity model under the guidance of Pete Stavros. That's a story you're familiar with, right?
Oh, I know Pete very well.
Yeah.
Pete Stavros, KKR, right?
Yes.
Barbarians at the gate.
Yep, those guys.
Those
And
guys. And look what more. In fact, there's a wonderful story when I'm a director, I should declare, of Just Capital. So we're having a meeting in Palm Beach, and the guy said, you know Kravis, and I said, "Yes, I know Henry," and a good guy he. When we went public, I talked to Henry. He didn't bite. He said, "Peter, I don't understand people businesses. I like widgets. I like widgets. I'm comfortable with widgets."
that's great.
Um, so I said, "Can you come speak at this conference and so forth?" And and he says, "No, I'm not there. But if you want one of our guys that you would like, and if you don't know him, you should meet Pete Stavros." And I called Pete Stavros and I said, "Henry thought that maybe we should meet. We have the same thing in common." And what a remarkable guy he is. Do you know his garage door story? It's magnificent.
Oh, it's a
It,
fantastic story.
yeah. Well, where after, as all private equity, eventually there's an exit strategy. That's what that's their business. They come in, they fix them up, and so forth. And he told me the story just for your viewers. At first, they said, "We want to do something good for the workers," and we said, "We'll give you $1 million, up to you to improve something that's important for you. We'll invest in something that's really worthwhile for you to make your lives better." This is early days. And they couldn't believe him. They thought it was a trick or something or other. So finally they decided, well, take him up on it. They said, "Well, how about air conditioning the factory?" And so they said, "Okay, we'll do that." So the air conditioning factory, and then it went from there because trust was built.
Mhm.
And in, I don't remember, 7, 8 years, whatever it took, the workers figured out how to transport and to package the doors and get them to the customers so that they gain about a week in terms of delivery time between the orders coming in and the door being delivered. There was a weak advantage. And they cleaned up. They cleaned up the market. So when they sold, right, you saw the film, these guys were getting like $250,000-$300,000 for their restricted stock. They went crazy over it. But that's capitalism. That's modern day capitalism,
It
where
can be.
they innovate, they drive productivity, and they reap in the benefits. And everybody win. And KKR made a ton of money on this deal,
Yeah, they
as
bought
did
the
everybody else.
They bought the company for about 500 million, if memory serves me, and they set up the acquired company as an employee with employee stock ownership plan. And I was having a conversation with Pete about this, and he said, "Well, you know, once you figured out how to do it, it becomes very straightforward." And then, but what also he realized, and I think this touches on some of your earlier observations about human capital, is he said these are hourly workers who work on
Yeah,
making overhead doors in the middle of Ohio, I think it was. And he said so that they've never had money to spend. So he invested in financial education. How do you invest your money prudently? How do you think about building wealth in a careful way? How do you make a budget? And so by the time the exit happened, and I believe Nucor Steel bought them for $3 billion. So you can do the math on that. I mean, that's a pretty nice chunk of appreciation. And at that time, the workers, they had T-shirts saying "I'm an owner," and there was actually a little mini documentary that was made about this. For those of you that
right.
are interested in finding out more, but to me, that's a shining example of
It's
what it
a
can do, what it
yeah.
can do. Right?
It's about the dignity of the people. We all are humans. We all want to be respected. We all want to feel that we have a purpose in our lives. That life has meaning. And that's the key. And you create a culture. The person who cleans the room in our hospital knows for a fact that they are a major factor in the healthcare business, that the patient is better because of the work that they do. And you know what? They're right. They are right. Because how the patient heals and how comfortable they feel and the caring that they're getting are all part of the healing process. And that's the kind of a culture that you have to build in whatever business you happen to be in. The workers have to feel that they are a big part of it. And you have to treat them with this, not just financially, but in every other way, to understand that there's purpose and meaning in their work. And when you do that, and that's what Dan Schulman found out. That's what he did. That's why they changed the culture of the company and it blossomed. And that's what all great companies do. Whether it's Home Depot, they sell not sexy products, but the people who work there. And the examples they do, they also take mentally challenged young men and women. And they can do reasonable work. They put them to do work they can do. And they are stacking shelves or carrying this, carrying that, but they're treated with such respect by their colleagues that they love working there. And this is the environment. And the people love to be able to be of help to those disabled folks. Ken's kids, as in Ken Langone, Ken's kids, they're called,
Yeah.
because he brought them in and said, hey, they can do something and they can have a meaningful life. And when we can create that level of compassion and caring as part of our culture, that's what we have to strive to become. And that's why I'm optimistic that sooner or later, whatever the trouble du jour may be, we're going to find out that that's the secret sauce to success in America. That's what brought us success after the war. The GI Bill that put young men into good education and into colleges for them to be the best they can be, and they produce amazing results. And so we will be fine as a country because I believe that we will get there by hook and by crook. And there are chapters and the pendulum swings and all that. but we all have a job to do. If we all care about, put politics aside for a moment, let's just do business and do what's right for the business. Have the shareholders win big time, both short term and long term. Take care of the people and take care of the customer and do the best thing that you can for your customer. You do those things as a businessman or businesswoman, you'll thrive and the country will thrive and reward you because they become the best customers you can. So it's a wonderful cycle that perpetuates itself. And that's what America is all about. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to work to help my little, whatever little I can do to push all of us forward. And if all of us link arms, as you do, Rita, and the work that you do and communicating with people and telling these stories, it's so important for all of us.
It's a better path forward, and I think a lot of executives, either they sort of accept what they think is the right way to do things without realizing there actually are choices here. And so I guess what I take away is that this is really a leadership question for people running, organizations, right?
Yes, this is our mission.
Mm-hmm.
This is our mission. And let's not look about what the government says or does or whatever. Why don't we businessmen and women do what we know is the right thing to do?
Indeed.
And if we do that, this country is going to be just great.
Well, Peter Georgescu, as always, an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you. Can't sign me up for the cause. If there's something I can do, I'd be very happy to do that. And thank you for the inspiring words.
Well, thank you, Rita, and thank you for what you do. And we all have to do our best in how we happen to behave in this world and the missions that we choose to embrace in this world. So lucky us, I say, Rita, lucky us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.